Hello guys, my name is SVB and I'm back with another video, and today we're going to wrap up this version of the thought process series with the final part of which DPS to pick and why. In this video, I'm going to cover the remaining DPS, this being Junkrat, Hanzo, Reaper, Mei, Torbjörn and Symmetra. So let's get to it guys. So I think we should start this video by covering Reaper, because a few people have been commenting asking if he should have been in the previous video where I covered flankers. And well, I can see how people could classify Reaper as a flanker, but personally, I wouldn't. I'd classify him as a lurker, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But fundamentally, the main difference between Reaper and the flankers I previously covered is mobility. Now post buff, Reaper has okay mobility. His teleport is now a lot more easy to use, and his Wraith form increases his speed slightly while also making him invulnerable. But the job of a flanker is to get into the backline and stay there, or harass constantly, neither of which is Reaper's forte. For example, Sombra and Tracer can stay deep behind enemy lines, using health packs to keep themselves topped up. Doomfist has such incredible mobility that he can jump in, uppercut, and kill a squishy, and punch out, or punch in, and vice versa. He also has an ult as an escape. Genji can dash, and on top of that, his dash can reset, meaning that if he dives in for a low HP target, he can dash right back out if he needs to. And he can wall climb to give him access to paths most other heroes can't use. And for Pharah, well, that's her entire modus operandi. She can just fly around terrain to get in and out when she wants. For Reaper, most of his trips are one way because of his long cooldowns. If he teleports in behind, he's committed himself very deep. If he gets spotted, he can Wraith form out, but Wraith form doesn't get you that far, and the enemy can see exactly where you're going, so they can plan on how to catch you. And if you Wraith form into the enemy, then you're definitely either killing them or dying. So ultimately, you can flank as Reaper, but it's generally risky, and you can't go in and out as a flanker should. Personally, the better way to play Reaper is as a lurker, somebody who waits for enemies to come to him. That's why he's so strong on control maps and on defense, because in both those scenarios, it's on the enemy to move past a certain predictable path where Reaper can already be lying in wait. Like this for example.
So Boston is going to have to make this grab Dragon Strike combo work. The changeover to Kalios was to give more protection and get a charge Zarya up from fighting in the trenches in the tank war.
Oh, here we go! That Blossom gets enough, he gets three! Whoa, gonna have to change his name to Slimu.
The Lurker Reaper is very good at killing backlines, but generally, Reaper is really good at shredding tanks, as most people already know. Because his weapon is a shotgun, it has a bit of a spread, but large hitbox tanks take every hit of the spread, provided you aim somewhere centrally. On top of this, Reaper's self-heal is based on his damage. So the more damage you do, the more you heal back. Meaning that spraying your shotguns into a tank is actually a really nice method of self-sustaining through fights. So for this reason, you'll quite often want to pick a Reaper when the enemy team has a lot of tanks, or in particular, when they're playing tanks like Roadhog or Winston, people with comparatively little shielding and the biggest hitboxes. Of course, anyone who's played Reinhardt in Platinum or below will tell you that it's a nightmare to face a Reaper who's marching towards you, shotguns blazing. But at least with his shield, Ryan can hold out a little longer and hope for backup. So with that out the way, now let's cover what I would call the zone control heroes of Overwatch. These are Junk, Mei, Sim and Torb. Let's start with Mei, since her method of zone control is perhaps the most obvious. Mei's strongest utility comes simply from her wall. It allows her to literally change the architecture of an Overwatch map for a little bit of time. Mei is amazing for players who can visualize space and angles well, because a correctly dropped wall is a free fight win every time. Obviously the walls work best in narrow chokeways, so in a second I'm going to give you examples of maps where Mei is most viable for this reason. But the general principle remains the same even if you play her on a map with no choke points. Wait for one or two members of the enemy team to be a few steps ahead of the rest of their team, then put a wall up behind them and isolate those characters, allowing your team a 1v6 or a 2v6 for free. So now let's look at a few places where this plays out well for Mei. The classic is King's Row A. Almost every attacker will go through the main gate, and the gap is the exact size of a Mei wall. This allows you to isolate the first person coming through, usually someone like a Reinhardt, and then let your team pounce on them, kill them for free, and end the fight right there. The same goes for Hanamura A. You wait for the first member to walk through, provided they're not somebody who has mobility to escape. You wall them off, and you laugh all the way to the bank. You can even do this on maps like Control Center on Lijiang Tower, where there's lots of small corridors to block off. By doing this, Mei can shut down entire areas of the map and force the opposition to either change their path or address the Mei specifically. You can also be quite creative with your walls, opening new paths for your team, or saving them from enemy ultimates. And finally, her ultimate Blizzard can make a certain area of the map completely unusable for the enemy team, and is very effective to lock up any objective in a clutch situation. The next zone controller to talk about is Junkrat, who has a bit more of a direct approach to controlling zones. Due to the nature of Junkrat's weapon, that being a grenade launcher, he can't be very precise with his damage at anything beyond short range. That is why he's most effective when denying a certain area of the map. He can spam his grenades and leave traps for the enemies in those predictable areas, particularly choke points, to make it incredibly difficult for them to come through. Think places like Anubis A, where attackers can only really go through two routes, both of which are narrow rooms. This lets Junkrat use the bounce of his grenades to full effect, and make sure they will always hit someone in a confined area. Paris A, Hanamura A, again maps with narrow entrances. These are the kind of places where Junkrat thrives on defending, just like Mei. His ultimate can also have this effect, because its loud and potentially lethal presence will cause attackers to split up and hide while it's around, meaning you've already forced them away from favorable positions at worst, and of course, if it hits, it can win fights on its own.
Azupe is able to melt Muma. Linkster, however, wins one fight. Muma back into it fairly quickly, and the tire! It couldn't be better! Jake, the patience plays off. You're exactly right, Hex, and he sinks 3 players into a world of hurt.
However, more so than most heroes, he's only really great on defense for a few reasons. Firstly, as defenders, you'll already be occupying a space, and attackers will likely be trying to take it away from you, so you know their path. But on attack, you're the one going through a predictable path. Theoretically, the defenders can set up anywhere, as long as they hurt you and deny you from getting to where you want to go, meaning that you can't easily force them into places or spam an area knowing that they have to be in a certain place. On top of this, you won't be able to set up so easily. The defenders will already be spamming your way, meaning you won't get free angles. But if you do want to run him on attack, make sure you're doing it for a reason. Maybe you want to run a very shield break heavy comp, or the enemy is running lots of tanks who you can indiscriminately throw grenades at to build a quick ult and then win fights that way. Next, let's head to Torbjörn. Now before his rework, Torb was also mostly only viable on defense, because of how dependent he was on his turret. Now though, he's a lot more free, since his turret builds itself once thrown out. He can leave it behind as he wanders off to do damage. His primary fire is actually pretty strong, even at long range, provided you can aim it right. His secondary fire, though it uses more ammo, does potentially more damage in a larger spread, meaning Torb can be quite scary to fight if you're a hero with a big hitbox. I know that if I'm playing Winston, I don't really want to find myself in a one-on-one against Torb, particularly because his new ability Overload gives him a surprise factor in fights, providing him with a sudden hit of armor, movement speed, and upping his DPS even further. And his new version of Molten Core is an amazing form of denying an area, and if you spread it around well, you can give your team a huge tactical advantage. If you put it all over a point or a payload during overtime, for example, or when the enemy team has pop ults and are committed to a fight, it means they either have to die on point or run away, both of which are big wins for you. However, turret placement is still important, so let's talk about it. Essentially, there's 2 styles of placement that depend on each team's comps. If you're running a very shield heavy comp, you might want to just put the turret right behind that shield and let it fire away without a care, in an attempt to maximize the damage you do from it. However, if the enemy team has flankers, your turret can actually become a really important tool. If you place it a bit behind your team, or at an off angle, it can zone out any flankers. It won't constantly be firing, but when it does, it'll not only alert you to the presence of someone trying to sneak into your backline, but it'll also do crucial damage to that flanker that might dissuade them from attacking you at all, or at least force them to use cooldowns. As mentioned in the previous part of the video, even a little bit of damage can make flankers like Genji much less effective, and much more scared to go in. Now, I'm not particularly a Torb specialist, so you should look for guides on turret placement if you plan on playing him. And with that, let's move on to our final zone control hero, Symmetra. Like Torb, Symmetra's rework has changed how she's played quite a lot. In fact, she's had 2 reworks, and now her main utility is a lot different to what it was before. Previously, Symmetra was reliant on her turrets and on being a good defensive hero to occupy choke points. Now she's on the opposite end of the spectrum, and her best ability is her teleport, which is particularly useful on attack. No doubt, all of you have seen clips of strats geared around using Sym's teleporter to surprise an enemy team or to go from an area otherwise inaccessible to most members of the Overwatch roster. And this is for a reason. The ability to do that, to suddenly allow your teammates to jump across a certain distance all at the same time, is very powerful and often undoes the entire game plan of a defense. Take the heroes we mentioned previously, for example. Mei and Junkrat, relying on an enemy coming through a set narrow chokeway. With Sym, you can just ignore that choke and head straight to point, And that's even better if you want to transport a particularly slow team, maybe one with lots of tanks, or you're expecting the enemy to pressure you a lot in a narrow area that you can avoid. So in that sense, you could say Sim has less zone control and more zone manipulation. However, all the Sim mains watching will be angry if I don't mention that Symmetra is more than just a teleporter. And in fact, if you have good tracking, she can actually output a crazy amount of damage. Sim's primary fire charges damage and ammo when hitting shields. So if the enemy team has a lot of those, you can boost yourself incredibly quickly till you're doing 195 damage per second. Yeah, really. That's Tracer dead in less than a second. On top of this, her ultimate is quite nice for zoning enemies out because they're forced to all be on one side or risk being useless to their teammates. So in the right hands, Sim can be really strong. Finally, who better to finish than with the meme lord himself, Hanzo. Now Hanzo also received a rework relatively recently, but it was much smaller, that being the removal of Scatter Arrow, remember that, in favor of Storm Arrow and his air jump ability. Now Storm Arrow is actually a really nice addition to Hanzo's kit because it compensates for what was one of previously his biggest problems, consistency. Hanzo can now actually be a fairly solid source of damage because he can spam if needed and pump a full quiver of Storm Arrows into his shield, but he still retains that pick potential when he's shooting those tree trunks of his, and his wall climb and air jump, or lunge as it's known, actually make him fairly mobile. He's not quite as dead to rights when he gets dove on as he was before, but how viable he is kind of entirely depends on how good you are with him. Like Widowmaker, Hanzo can scale in threat really rapidly. A good Hanzo will land shot after shot and get kill after kill. They'll even be able to deal with threats like Pharos in the sky. But when Hanzo's bad, he's really bad. If you can't hit shots consistently, you're not going to do anything for your team. Some heroes will give passive value, but Hanzo really will not. Taking safe shots and breaking shields is fine. Like I said, Hanzo can now be relied to do that kind of stuff more consistently. But if that's all you're doing, there's plenty of better heroes to choose from, and whatever the enemy team picked will be doing a lot more work for them. In terms of the kind of comps he fits into, well, Hanzo's usually very good in a double sniper comp, because his Sonic Arrow is usually just a nice tool for some scouting. But with a Widowmaker, you suddenly have a deadly combo, because that Sonic Arrow sets both of you up, and later, when she has wall hacks, you can both easily get picks together. And that's the strength of that comp, constant ability to get a pick from nowhere. Also, his ult synergizes really well with Zarya, and dropping Dragon Strike on top of Graviton Surge is one of the best follow-ups you can get. So when it comes to Hanzo, it's all really about execution. If you're good at him, he can kind of do a bit of everything, but if you're bad at him, he's going to do a whole lot of nothing. And while he's good at a lot of things, he's not necessarily excellent at a lot either. If you want pure spam, or pure sniping, or pure shield break, you can get better picks. Moving on, let's head back to the top and summarize Reaper. Now, you want to run Reaper if the enemy's running a lot of tanks, particularly tanks like Winston and Hammond, who are harassing your backline because you can shut them down really easily. And if for some reason they're running Hammond Hog or Winston Hog, then start rubbing those hands together because it's hunting season. Reaper is best when sneaky, so if the enemy team is quite oblivious and disjointed, then you can get a lot of value, but that's easier to pull off on defense because of the pathing issue I told you about. Against smart teams though, who keep their distance from Reaper, he will get no value because his range is so short, and because his mobility is so low within a fight, if they focus you, you will die easy. So Reaper really is a hero of taking it as it comes. If you're getting space, if you're getting the chance to lay out the damage, great. If not, might be time to switch. Then, let's talk about Mei. As I pointed out, Mei is great on maps or sections of maps where there are narrow areas for you to wall off that can isolate enemies easily. She's also great for countering mobility-based heroes like Doomfist, Genji, and Hammond, because once the freeze kicks in on these guys, they will become useless fast. If you patrol your backline, you can make being dove on nearly impossible. And obviously, anyone who's played 2CP will tell you that Mei is the devil. I mean, great as a stall pick. However, be careful when picking Mei outside of her viable zones. Sure, you can always land a nice wall, but her usefulness will go down drastically. She's not going to output a lot of damage, and if no one is near her, she's not going to get any freezes in either. She's all utility. So if you get no utility, then you best swap off. With Junkrat, it also comes down to maps a lot of the time. On certain maps, he has perfect areas to spam into, which make getting through without dying or taking a shed load of damage nearly impossible. This is doubly the case on defense, where enemy pathing is predictable. However, if the space is wide open, or if you're getting dove on hard, or if the enemy isn't walking into your spam areas, then you're going to find yourself being pretty useless. This is a lot more likely to happen on attack, so be very careful when making that decision. Make sure you're picking Junkrat for a specific reason, because he's also fairly easily countered by range, so people like Far and Widowmaker can just have junk for lunch all day. Then there's Torb, who's not necessarily an insta-pick on any map, but he can be more than useful. As I said, his turret can really shut down flankers, or lay out lots of damage from behind the shield. A Torb bunker on payload maps is still very good. On top of this, if you can aim, he can actually do a lot of damage. Just ask Defran, and his Molten Core is great for zoning people. However, he doesn't really excel at too much. His damage isn't insane, his mobility is low, and his utility isn't high either. The players who pick him tend to pick him because they're comfortable on him. Beyond that, I can't really say you need him for any particular scenario. And last but not least, we have Symmetra. Now, as mentioned, her greatest utility is in her teleporter, which means that if you're picking Symmetra, you need your whole team on the same page. Obviously, this can be both a good and bad thing. You can make some really creative strategies if you've got everyone on board, and you can unlock otherwise tight defenses. On top of this, Sim can really feed off shields and do a lot of damage if allowed to. But if your team isn't using your TP, or if your teleport shenanigans aren't actually paying off, then Sim is objectively a bad pick. That's also why she's not that good on defense, because usually you don't really want to move your defense around too much. If you're running a dive defense, well, those guys don't need any help moving around. And if you're running a bunker, then you don't tend to move the bunker too much. And when it comes to Sim as a DPS, well, she has really short range, low mobility, no self-sustain, and she's generally kind of easy to kill. Her ult is nice for zoning, but compared to other DPS ults, there's plenty of better ones. And that's it, guys. That's the thought process behind every hero pick covered. So theoretically, you now know which situations you'd pick each hero in the Overwatch roster for and why. Thanks for all the support during these videos, and I'm glad you guys found them so helpful. I definitely do want to continue the thought process series for things other than hero picks though, because I think understanding reasoning behind decisions in Overwatch is a really key aspect of the game, since so much of it comes down to making the right decision at the right time. As always, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons who are going to hopefully help me decide how to move the thought process series forwards whenever I decide to make the next installment. If you want to help too, or if you've got some ideas, then follow the link in the description and join the patron list. And if you did like this video, please do share, like and subscribe, and thanks for watching through the entire series, if indeed you did. If you didn't, the link to the full playlist will be in the description too. But that's all from me for today. I'll be back next week with another video. See you guys soon.